Welcome to Tech Unheard, a podcast that takes you behind the scenes of the most exciting developments in technology. I'm Rene Haas, your host and CEO of Arm. Today, I'm joined by Mark Chen, Chief Research Officer at OpenAI. You might know them as the creators of ChatGPT and DALL-E. Before serving as Chief Research Officer, Mark was the head of Frontiers Research at OpenAI, focusing on multimodal modeling and reasoning research. Mark has led the teams that's created DALL-E, developed codecs, and incorporated visual perception into GPT-4. Now in his current role, Mark's goal is to push the frontier for OpenAI science and research. Mark Chen, welcome to ARM. You've come all this way to meet with me. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Yeah, no, good to see you in person.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they say when you read autobiographies or biographies, start at the beginning, because the beginning will tell you a whole heck of a lot. So maybe just starting with where you grew up, how you got into technology the way that you did.
Absolutely. So it's a really hard question to answer, unfortunately. You started with probably the hardest one. But I was born on the East Coast, but my parents were very nomadic. So we moved around a lot. My parents worked at Bell Labs, and then they moved over to the West Coast. So I did part of my schooling in the West Coast.
Were they in Homedale, New Jersey?
They were in Edison. Yeah, but in the Homedale site.
In the Homedale site, yep.
Exactly, yeah. So after that, my dad got the startup itch. He moved over to California. We were there for a couple years, and then we went back to Taiwan after that. So that's where I did my high school and part of middle school.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
How old were you when you moved?
I think probably 12 or 13 years old.
So coming from the U.S. public school system, when you got into Taiwan, you're like, oh my God. What is that?
No, it was rebellion for half a year. But I think there is a kind of love where, it starts as hate. And, after 6 months, I really loved Taiwan. It's just the center of the chip ecosystem. So,
yeah, well, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
I am quite curious about coming from was it a public school or private school in the U.S.?
It was a public school.
So coming from the U.S. public school system at age 12 or 13 into Taiwan, did you find like, oh my gosh, I got to catch up?
Well, it was a little bit of a culture shock, but I already liked math and science a lot. So a lot of it was just, going from more of a kind of a free-spirited teenager to an environment where everyone's wearing uniforms.
Right.
You have fairly strict kind of teaching style. So that was the big adjustment. But I think it was good to get experience from both of these worlds, right? One where it was more about kind of learning for yourself, and another environment where it was about discipline.
Gotcha. And then did you do university in Taiwan?
No, then I went back. So I did my college at MIT.
Yep.
There I studied math and some computer science as well.
Yep.
But I was a late bloomer to computer science. Yeah, I only really started programming towards the end of my college career. One of my roommates kind of goaded me to do it. And I was like, hey, I think I'm going to be a mathematician, but I'll try this thing out. And of course, it's addictive, right?
For sure.
Yeah.
So math and science were your proclivities, but not so much into computers until you...
not into practical programming until later in life.
Yeah, gotcha. And then after that, tell us kind of what you did with your first
school. So my first career was in finance. It really was a little bit of an accident as well. So I thought I was going to go into theoretical computer science, and then on a whim, in my senior year of college, I took an internship at Jane Street, and it showed me kind of the appeal of working in industry. Mm-hmm. It's very pragmatic, but you still have a lot of the really exciting problems that you do studying in a more self-contained kind of academic environment. So that was exciting to me. I spent a couple years at a hedge fund and then a couple years at a high-frequency trading firm as a partner.
We talked about this once before, but I think for the listeners, it'd be quite interesting because that's not exactly what OpenAI does.
No, not at all.
But there's a lot of similarities in terms of just the way of thinking from a mathematics perspective, from what goes on with high-frequency trading to AI models. What were the things that helped you bridge that from the stuff you had done in the finance world, which you did, for 5-6 years or so?
About 5 or 6 years.
To OpenAI.
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing is it teaches you rigor in experimentation. So in the financial markets, there really is no kind of fudging the benchmarks or anything, right? You have a very hard evaluation, which is how much money your models generate. And you really have to be honest, principled, rigorous in your experimentation. I think a lot of that carries over to the science that we did at OpenAI in the early days.
Yeah. Were traditional AI, traditional is a funny thing to say in such a new industry, but transformer-based models doing the work when you were in the finance world, or how would you kind of think about neural networks relative to the thinking world versus the quant/financial space?
Yeah. So I would model finance as about 2 years behind the state of the art in AI at any given point in time. So I remember when it was 2017, 2018, the time that I was exiting finance, people that were starting to catch on to neural networks, they were building out their first clusters. And yeah, I was also looking into kind of neural-based modeling in the finance world as well.
Right.
Yeah.
And just looking now back where so much is happening in terms of obviously in the AI space we want to talk about, how has the finance world picked up on that from what you've seen?
Yeah. So they're also all in. But I will say one dividing line is you tend to get more AGI true believers on the tech side. And people on the finance side today are still more AGI skeptical.
When you say AGI skeptical from the finance world, what do you mean?
Right. I think it's just straight up when you feel like, hey, do you believe that AI will fundamentally transform the shape of the economy in 5 years? They tend to have a more pessimistic view.
And why do you think that is? It's funny you say that because I do find that also,
right.
Not finance per se, but other industries that I interact with who have different either methodologies for scientific research or product development, however they do that, the skepticism bar is a lot higher than I would have intellectually anticipated. But in the finance world, why do you think that is?
I can only answer for the high-frequency trading world, where a lot of it is extrinsic to the pure modeling. So I really do believe that AI can improve the modeling side of things, but there's so much on latency. There's so much about your private sources of data. So I think there's just so many extrinsic factors of alpha that maybe AI and modeling itself just really isn't a huge part of it yet.
As I said, I run into this, in other industries, and some of the things I hear back is our problem cannot be modeled. The data sets either don't exist or the problem is a far more complex model than AI or AGI could ever assist with. Do you think that applies to the thinking in the high-frequency trading world?
Well, I don't know. We hear this refrain over and over again. I think you have to be in the world to really believe in it. Sometimes you just have to see the tech to start feeling the AGI, as we call it. And I think at OpenAI, actually going in, I would say I was somewhat of a skeptic when it came to AGI. I think much of the world was back then. And really just seeing the progress of the model, seeing the capabilities, that really opens your eyes to it.
Yeah. So the story as to why you joined OpenAI is a cool one. Why don't you maybe share that with folks?
Yeah. Well, I think over time, it has a lot to do with finance, and it also has a little bit to do with AI as well. But, finance, it's, I think, a hard industry for someone who wants to make impact. And what I realized having been in finance for many years was that the set of competitors, it's the same. Everyone gets a little bit faster, but at the end of the day, you're still competing against the same people. You're still competing on the same objectives, and the extrinsic world doesn't change too much for it. And I felt like, that wasn't a very satisfying way to live out the rest of my life. And it felt like I needed to make some sort of change. At the same time, I saw what happened with AlphaGo, and that was equally inspiring, scary, so many feelings wrapped up in one. And I just felt like I had to really get into that. So some of the first projects I did were in reinforcement learning, just figuring out how do I train these deep Q networks to play Atari games. And once you start taking on some of these projects, it's very addictive.
But OpenAI in 2018 was a very different company, obviously, than they are now.
Absolutely.
And with, much smaller. Charter was a little bit different. I think that drew you a little bit to kind of
It did. Yeah, it did. So I joined a nonprofit at the time. And in some sense, you can view that as a reaction away from finance. So, I felt like I was in a very materialistic world and I wanted to do something with impact. And I do feel like a lot of early OpenAI had that mindset of, we believe in transformative AI. We want to bring it about to the world. We want it to benefit humanity. And that persists to the leadership today.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's very clear that Sam is a big believer in that. So you've been there now 7-8 years. Are you surprised at how far it's come in 7 years? Or do you look at it and say, you know what, there's so much more to go? I mean, how do you think about the last 7 years?
I think both are simultaneously true. Yeah. So I don't think anyone could have predicted this trajectory of AI. All we could do was predict kind of what we call perplexity. So this is the ability for you to model, let's say, human language, or a measure of accuracy in some sense of being able to model human language. And you can predict for a particular scale what kind of accuracy you're going to get. But what you can't predict is the emergent capability that falls out of getting that level of accuracy. So, when we got to GPT-2, it wasn't obvious that, this level of perplexity would mean that you get coherent paragraphs. And then with GPT-3, not clear that that level of perplexity would give you the ability to do in-context learning. And then GPT-4, the ability to crush all of these college-level exams. So really, it's really inspiring to see all of the emergent capabilities that come out of the model.
In one sense, the scaling, I wonder how you think about this. How much of the progress or scaling of the capability, as you say, is a function of breakthroughs of the models versus we just have access to far more compute and we can just throw more dollars at it, either whether it's chips or power or whatever it is?
I think this was studied once, and clearly both factors are very important, but I think the algorithmic insights and efficiency improvements have slightly outpaced the compute contributions.
And can you say a little bit more about, without giving away any, and no secret sauce to be given away here, but anything just that would give the indication is where the algorithms have just gotten smarter?
Right. So I think today, there's a sweeping generalization of we use transformers to train language models, but transformers themselves have evolved a lot over time too. And I can talk about some early work. We evolved the attention patterns of transformers. So I did some work early on with Riwan at OpenAI about factorizing attention, and that's an efficiency gain. There are other subtle things too. I think where you do normalization in transformers, how you set up the aspect ratios, all of those things are things that you have to figure out and be very careful about.
Is it transformers till the end of time, or do you think we get where there's an S curve where transformers run out of runway and there's something next?
It may be possible that something takes over, but I think the longer that transformers are here and the longer that they remain dominant, the more we co-design around them.
Yeah.
So we will build chips that are efficient there. They become the benchmarks, right? And we will build kernels for them. So the bar keeps getting higher for something to overtake transformers, and it's hard to see that.
Are we there already? Because I do wonder, to your point of the model has been established, hardware architectures morph to it, scientists know it, and you may have this bias that starts to run in and to say, if everything is transformer based in terms of how I develop the next data sets and models, that's how it's going to get done.
Yeah, I think transformers, they're popular because they're a really good balance of simple and expressive at the same time.
Right.
So they get all of the mixing primitives that you need, a highly expressive mixing primitive, but they're also very simple, which allows you to scale it and engineer it in a fairly straightforward way without too much gymnastics. So I think it's a very well-suited architecture.
Yeah. I don't know how much you interface with potential clients, but do you hear the safety thing increasing now, given with the capability of certainly 4.5 and 0.3? And
yeah, I think so. And, today is a world where we're moving towards AI with connectors. So these are AI models that can plug into your email, your Google Docs, your Slack. And I think that poses real risks.
Yeah.
People today are fairly good at jailbreaking models too, if there's a very motivated attacker. So what is the implication, right? You could imagine that someone motivated extracts all that information away from you, or they're able to launch some kind of coordinated attack.
Right. So then literally at the source code level, you could just simply put things inside the model that when those queries were requested, be rejected.
Right, yeah. So I think there's even the possibility you allude to where if there's a bad faith model developer, they could create a model and bake in certain behaviors into weights where there's some kind of trigger for that happening.
Yeah, no, I it's interesting because I remember attending the very first AI safety summit. This was, almost 2 years ago, and there was a lot of talk on it then, and maybe it's just the circles I'm moving in. I haven't heard as much on it, even though the models have progressed incredibly since then. So that makes a ton of sense. You've done a lot of work, I know yourself, on multimodal, and that's yet another extremely cool frontier. Are the architectures today well suited for multimodal in terms of it's a big data problem, right? The data sets are really gigantic.
Right.
Back to the transformer piece. Just talk a little bit about multimodals and where you think that goes.
Absolutely, yeah. This is a topic near and dear to my heart because one of the first projects I did was trying to apply transformer architectures to multimodal data sets. So one of the big papers that I'm still very proud of today is called ImageGPT. And that was a proof of concept that you could do image generation using the same text transformer stack, right? And all you have to do is view images as a language in this very special vocabulary of pixels. And I think at the time, you had different architecture like GANs or VAEs that generated images, and you used transformers for text. And I think the importance of proving out this approach is it paved the path for something like DALL-E, right? Where when you have image generation, you want it to be steerable image generation. So you want text to be the language by which you specify the image you want. And in that world, if you have a different architecture for text and images, it's just not satisfying, right? You would want to be able to just throw all of your data into the same model and train it to be able to output the image. So since then, we've expanded on that idea and created 4.0. And this was a model we launched last year. And it really showed the strength of a fully multimodal integrated approach where you just throw audio, images, video, text all at the same model. And you can get, really emotive speech, right? You can get images like the image generation launch that we just did.
It was super.
That was so fun.
Super cool. But it also seemed like and I guess if you're in the world of selling power or selling data centers or selling chips, a good thing because the data set just explodes in that world.
Right. Yeah. I think there's so much intelligence locked up in multimodal data, and just the ability to expand your data set by orders of magnitude through that and be able to try to figure out how to unlock that is important.
One of the things that when I talk to researchers in different fields and different areas, back to this problem's too hard for AI/AGI to solve. When you think about real world problems, whether it's around chip design, whether it's around pharmaceutical research, whether it's around drug discovery linked to that, where are areas that you look at and say, these are really, really tough problems that we're not there yet, but we can get there?
Right. So I think everything above that you mentioned falls in that class. And to back up there, this is one of the big motivations of us working on reasoning. So our reasoning models today, they give us this hammer where we can take smaller amounts of data and efficiently learn on a smaller amount of data to get the same level of capability. So many of these verticals, like you mentioned, they're not going to have as much data as the whole internet. And you need a technique that allows you to productively spend compute learning on that data. And that's what reasoning gives us. It gives us a tool for doing that. So we're actually very excited for the possibility of models to get very specialized in these areas. We've already seen that with things like math and computer science, right? These models are so good at solving math problems right now and so good at, coding up very difficult algorithms. And I think a lot of these techniques can be adapted to things like drug discovery, like you say.
Right. Are they good at invention? On one level, they're awfully good at solving problems that are bounded problems.
Yes.
Right, where the answer is known, or
Yes.
there is an answer that you can get to. But what about areas where there isn't an answer today? Invention being a broad term for that.
So I have this slightly controversial claim that they're better at invention than we think. And the reason I think that is, we've entered these models into some of the hardest algorithms competitions in the world. And, I have a lot of experience in these competitions. They're often designed to be anti-pattern problems. Basically, what makes a good problem is you can't fit it to a set of known techniques, right? Otherwise, all the contestants are going to know how to solve it.
Right.
So what we find is oftentimes these models surpass our expectations on these more ad hoc, like you have to come up with something that really doesn't fit any pattern. And it does really surprise me in some of these problems. It can be very creative in spots where you don't expect it to be. And I think you do speak to a good gap, though. There is some sense in which they are models which take tasks and then give you responses to tasks.
Mm-hmm.
And you would ideally love them to propose tasks and have taste in some sense. Those kind of things are hard, you
Right.
know?
Can they be solved? And how much of that is we need more data and or our models in terms of how the human brain invents based upon having either not seen something or been exposed to something?
Right, right. And I think today models probably already do have a sense for what intuitively is, aesthetic to a human, right? And I think it can leverage that to figure out hypotheses that, would be interesting to humans as well.
Yeah.
So I think it probably has this latent notion of what innovation looks like, but we should just figure out how to tap into that.
Yeah, it's always a thing I've thought about with AGI. If I make it analogous to a
Right.
human brain, where the AI today is incredible, given enough data
Mhm.
and enough time, it'll figure out any problem. Yet humans aren't always exposed to everything.
Right, right,
Yet somehow we figure out paths and ways to learn things,
right.
having actually never been exposed to the entire data set. And to me, that's to some extent, everyone's got their own
Right.
kind of weird
Mhm.
definition of AGI. To me, that is a bit of AGI, is being able to learn and invent without actually having all the data fit into it.
Absolutely. And that's the way we're going, right? It's like we're developing more and more data efficient algorithms where you're learning how to reason and draw insights from less and less data. I think one challenge, though, that I've personally reflected on for a while is how much of invention is interpolation. And I think it's actually a higher fraction than we'd think. Having seen the math world for a while, actually a lot of very cool results are, you take one person who's a geometer or some person who's an algebraist and, they link together some patterns that they've discovered in their own fields and they bring it together. And I think maybe there's a lot less true pure innovation than we think.
Can AGI replace or augment entrepreneurship?
Great question. So I think it accelerates entrepreneurship. And in the sense that I think if we really do coding models right, we create some sort of interface where a human doesn't have to learn how to code to produce something that they can ship to the world, right? If you can say, hey, I want to build an app that connects riders to drivers, right? That app can just get built. The model thinks for a long time, it makes it robust and deploys it to the world.
So many industries have been washed out by technology advancements, and there's always the doomsayers who say this is going to eliminate jobs, et cetera, et cetera. Stenographers and typewriter tools, for example, that were replaced. Coders are a different species, obviously. And there's one axiom that says the efficiency of these models will generate ability for more coders, versus another axiom that says 5 years from now we won't need as many as we've got today. Where do you lie on that?
Yeah,
spectrum?
I mean, I just think there's a lot of demand from services that isn't met. And AI will be a point of leverage for people, for professionals especially, right? They're going to be able to be 2x more productive or 3x more productive and service that many more people. I think it'll drive the cost down, but maybe the demand is there at a lower cost, right?
Yeah.
So I think it could be different for different industries, but I do think there's a lot of demand out there given a cheap enough cost.
That's kind of what I think too. I mean, we're in a bubble from the standpoint of where we live physically and the world that revolves around AI, that is Silicon Valley. So much of the world yet still has a long ways to go to embrace technology, let alone AI. But it's the speed at which this is moving is just amazing. I mean, just looking at just your tools, your deep research tools and your reasoning tools, the answers are they're not textbooks anymore. They're succinct. You're actually talking to a human being.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like really the bar for deep research is hours of economically useful work.
Yeah.
And I think it lives up to that. We've gotten testimonials from people in biology, for instance, who say, when it comes to drug discovery, I have a panel of scientists, and having them in a room for a couple of hours, they produce similar analysis as the model. So I think it really is exciting that we can do that kind of work.
If you think about the next number of years, what are the things that are in the industry's way, not OpenAI's way, in the industry's way that says, gosh, if we had more blank, and it's not GPU, GPU is not a valid answer here. If we had more blank, we would be able to go a lot faster.
Honestly, I think for now, we need a lot more researchers and ideas. Right now is such a fruitful time to be doing research.
Yeah.
I think we're limited just by the number of ideas we can come up with. Like you said it before, if we could get the models to help automate that and help accelerate that, that would be phenomenal. But we need people to come up with ideas, implement ideas. But I do think another big thing is embodiment.
What do you mean by embodiment?
Right. So we have a product called Operator. And what it does is it's a computer using agent, meaning it takes as input computer screens, and as output it emits keyboard strokes or it emits click actions. And you can think of it as it's an interface to your digital work or your digital life, right? And when you think about the future, the extension of that is robotics, right? Like essentially you're building an AI brain for a robot which can act in the real world. And I think there, you'll have bottlenecks around how quickly can we make the hardware work.
Do you think agents become everything over time and we don't really have apps, we don't really have operating systems in the classic sense today in terms of you have to pull information out from a lot of different sources to get the answers? Do you think we get to a world where it's just an agent that exists somewhere?
Absolutely. I would love to have an agent where you just query for all of the information that you need. It should just be behind this layer, right? And you don't have to deal with it. I think Operator really does fulfill that promise if it works.
Right.
And you ask, hey, what is this information? It can check your Gmail. It can operate through any kind of interface you use in a computer.
And does it need to be a computer? In other words, can it be kind of anything moving? One of the movies I love to watch are the Back to the Future movies, which just in one sense, a lot of things are wrong, but there are a lot of things that are rather clever. And Back to the Future 2, there's a scene where Marty McFly comes into his house, and as he moves from room to room, the appliances in the room know the context.
Right.
And they're either making his meal or they're turning on the news or they're getting his boss on a video Zoom call, which, by the way, a video Zoom call that they were showing in the 1980s. Could you see a world where these agents are suddenly just now intelligent, running kind of everywhere? And back to your point, it's all kind of hidden underneath the hood.
I think they should be. Yeah. And you can imagine we have a model in the cloud, right? Yeah. It's your OpenAI agent, and all of these things are plugged into it, right? And so they can understand the context as you go from one place to another.
Yeah. You are, on a personal, professional level, working at the hottest company in this space and one of the hottest times in this space. What is it like? Do you pinch yourself and say, oh my God, I can't believe I'm actually in the middle of all this?
Yeah, every day. I mean, it's a great privilege to work at OpenAI. I started as a resident actually at OpenAI. And what that means is someone who wasn't a PhD in the field, right? And I'm grateful Ilya took a bet on me back then. And he trained me up in machine learning. And it's completely unpredictable, you know, and I'm just so grateful.
Yeah, no, it's exciting to watch. And, having been around Silicon Valley my whole career and watching these shifts from PCs to internet to mobile phones, seeing what's going on here is it's a thrill to be part of.
Absolutely.
Mark Chen, thank you for schlepping all the way down to San Jose from San Francisco and joining us today. Really enjoyed it.
Absolutely. Me too. Thanks so much for having me. Yeah.
Thanks for listening to this month's episode of Tech Unheard. We'll be back next month for another look behind the boardroom door. To be sure you don't miss new episodes, follow Tech Unheard wherever you get your podcasts. Until then, Tech Unheard is a custom podcast series from ARM and National Public Media. And I'm ARM CEO Rene Haas. Thanks for listening to Tech Unheard.
ARM Tech Unheard is a custom podcast series from ARM and National Public Media. Executive producers Erica Osher and Shannon Boerner. Project Manager Colin Harden, Creative Lead Producer Isabel Robertson, Editors Andrew Meriwether and Kelly Drake, Composer Aaron Levison. ARM production contributors include Ami Badani, Claudia Brandon, Simon Jared, Jonathan Armstrong, Ben Webdell, Sofia McKenzie, Kristen Ray, and Saumil Shah. Tech Unheard is hosted by ARM Chief Executive Officer Rene Haas.